Bob Nightengale to talk about those electees. Bob, how you doing today?
Yeah, doing great. Yourself?
Doing very good. So I view that this the Baseball Hall of Fame, and I first wanted to ask you this question because I heard this brought up last night on TV, and that is there's this idea that the writers and the voters have kind of changed their perception when it comes to voting for the players and maybe being a little bit more open-minded in letting guys in, especially after the fact that a few years ago there was nobody voted in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think just there's so many great players now. I mean, the year there was no 5 years ago, I still voted for, I would say, 3 or 4 guys. But now, it's just this era, there's so many great players coming. And I think maybe some of the stance have been softened, but I think I think the right guys are getting voted in now. And, it's been, 16 guys in 5 years. It's been quite a run.
Let's look at some of the guys who got in, because I feel like every time I turn on the TV or the radio, everyone keeps talking about the guys who didn't get in, which I think is really unfair to the guys who were elected. Let's first look at Chipper Jones. To me, one of the great things about him wasn't just the numbers and the stats, but it was how he was perceived. Seemed like every year when the Braves came to Philadelphia, whether it was Veterans Stadium or Citizens Bank Park, the Larry chants were out there every single year. In many ways, he was the most feared hitter on a Braves dynasty team. And I think that when you look at the Braves, everyone talks about their pitching, but Chipper Jones, he wasn't just a consistent and a great player, but he was the most feared hitter.
Yeah, he was one of those guys who was just a star quality all over him. I mean, he was the guy you had to shut down if you want to stop the Braves, and he was such an integral part of that whole dynasty they had. And he loved the spotlight. I mean, he loved being the hated guy in New York and Philly, wherever he went. So he embraced that role, and just a sheer superstar player, almost from the get-go.
He's one of only 2 players now to make the Hall of Fame who was drafted #1 overall. Is that more of a tribute to him and Ken Griffey Jr., or does that say something about how baseball views prospects and how they scout them?
Well, yeah, I just think it shows how tough scouting is and how many misses there are. I mean, I think all these teams that always hang on their prospects, you always hear, hey, this guy's going to be the next, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, this sort of thing. It's just you never know. I mean, Mike Piazza was a 62nd round draft pick. A lot of these guys are late round picks. Doesn't measure the heart and desire. So there's so many more misses than hits. It's like just because the guy's, the #1 pick or even a first round pick, it doesn't mean a thing.
When you look at a guy like Vladimir Guerrero, I always viewed him as that guy that you never want to see up if you're a pitcher, because he just hit everything. I know everyone talks about the ball off the ground. He could hit for a home run, but he was such a good all-around hitter. I think that it almost overshadows the power numbers, because when you're that good and that consistent of a player, it basically makes it so much harder for pitchers to pitch to you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you saw the replays where he hit pitches that bounced in front of the plate, for singles and doubles, and his strike zone was everywhere, hated to walk. But just, I mean, it was hard to opposing pitchers, it's hard to outsmart him because you just know what he was going to swing at. Try to get him to swing as many balls as possible, but he was just such an unbelievable bad ball hitter. Very feared hitter. I mean, he was a guy that just was a superstar right away, and just a blast to watch, whether on the base pass or with his arm in right field.
I always felt like I was so happy for him when he went to the Angels, because I always seemed like when he was with the Expos, he was always overlooked because he was all the way up there in Montreal, and people had this attitude that like the things that happen in Montreal with the Expos like another planet or something, when it's still one of the best hitters in baseball. And you saw that with the Angels. It felt like that's when he finally, for some baseball fans, was finally started getting the attention and recognition he deserved.
Oh, absolutely. You saw the same thing happen with Andre Dawson. Took him a while to get in the Hall of Fame, just because people, foreign country, people weren't paying attention to what was going on there. Tim Raines. So I think Montreal heard all those guys just because it was kind of a remote place and nobody paid attention to what was going on in Canada. So once he went to the Angels, of course, won the MVP with the Angels. Be interesting to see what Hattie wears, whether it's Angel or Expo. My guess is he'd rather be an Angel because they're in existence, but his heart might tell him the Expos.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I always viewed him as an Expo first because that's when I first remember him hitting all those home runs and doing all the crazy stuff like throwing guys out at second and third base. So it's definitely gonna be interesting to see what Hattie picks. Let's move over to Jim Thome. I don't know if this is fair or not, but I always felt like Jim Thome got more recognition inside the game of baseball from players and writers than from fans. Every guy you talk to, I feel like, not you specifically, but every time you hear about Jim Thome, it's how great of a teammate he was, how hard of a worker he was, how much he loved the game, how much he loved playing with his teammates. And I love seeing him getting in on the first ballot because I feel like it's basically the game of baseball saying we recognize the fact that you were more than just this power hitter. You were a great baseball player. We're going to recognize you for your place in history.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right in that. Is one of the nicest guys in the world you ever want to meet, not just in baseball, but in life. And it was nice to see him get rewarded. It wasn't just a slugger. He did more than that. Hardworking guy. I mean, he played until nobody wanted him anymore. He would still be playing today if he could still produce and was getting contract offers even for the minimum salary. But yeah, just such a hard-working guy at his craft, and just a dangerous guy. Not like a Guerrero or a Chipper Jones type thing. He wasn't winning MVPs or, he was a feared hitter, but not feared to beat you in all kinds of different ways. More of a one-dimensional guy. But that being said, just a tremendous power hitter.
I know a lot of people in this area, they remember Jim Thome for his time in Philadelphia. And I always felt that Jim Thome, when the Phillies acquired him, it was like that was the moment and that was the player that really gave the franchise credibility again after all of those years of just being such a mediocre team and just underwhelming and having the likes of like a Robert Person and Travis Lee and Rico Brogna out there. Now you have a bona fide star at first base and a guy who was a real box office attraction. I feel like in a lot of ways, Jim Thome is responsible for turning around the perception of the Phillies at the time. Yeah,
I agree with that. I mean, he wanted to go to the Phillies, and it was a tough, gut-wrenching decision for him to leave Cleveland, but just the money made it so hard to pass up. And Pat Gillick, the one thing about Pat, Hall of Fame executive, but he always brought great free agent personalities in there. That it wasn't just about what he could do on the field talent-wise, but just what kind of person he was. And he helped a lot of guys. That was very cool. Just the Phillies guys yesterday saying how much Jim Thome meant to them. And he did. That's what kind of guy he was. Just a tremendous teammate, tremendous to the media. There's not enough accolades to describe him as a person.
We're talking with Bob Nightengale of USA Today. You can follow him on Twitter at @BNightingale. Bob, Trevor Hoffman. For me, and listen, I'm so glad I'm not a voter, so I'm so glad that guys like you get to deal with this problem. I was always a little conflicted with Trevor Hoffman because to me, he wasn't always the best closer in baseball, but he was so great for so long. I feel like he always kind of like straddled that line between one of the greatest of all time and a guy who was just like so upper level, but he just wasn't elite. And I feel like, am I just overlooking how great he was? Because I feel like he got to the Hall of Fame because he was so great for so long, not as much that he was always the greatest pitcher in the game at that time.
Yeah, I think you're overlooking how great he was. What hurt him more than anything was the fact that he pitched on the West Coast. And so people were in bed at 1 o'clock in the morning when he would appear in games. I mean, he was he was the West Coast version of Mario Rivera without the postseasons. I mean, Rivera was in the postseason all the time, and we all know what he did there. Where Hoffman was a real team leader. He was the guy. He wasn't throwing 100 miles an hour, but he was just so good with the changeup, everything else. Very, very well respected. Of everybody in that group, you know, him and Thome are the two guys who probably were respected the most, just as great teammates.
What was the one thing to you that set Hoffman apart from a lot of other closers? Because I mean, you're talking about an era with guys like, you know, Billy Wagner and Rob Nett and all these other guys, and Hoffman, to me, what sets him apart, for me at least, is how long he was great for. What was the one thing that stood out to you about Trevor Hoffman?
Yeah, not only how how great he was for that duration, but just what he meant in that club. I mean, he was the guy. Young guys come in and stuff. I don't care what position you are. You had to go by what Trevor Hoffman said. And Hoffman was the first guy there, the last guy to leave. You know, a ball player is a ball player. And that's hard to find among pitchers. You know, it's rare. You know, you saw that, of course, in a Roy Halladay, a Chris Carpenter type thing. But it's tough to find among pitchers these days. And he was just that guy, just epitomized what a ball player was about.
Bob, let's touch on the guys who didn't make it in this year. Let's start with Edgar Martinez, got 70.4%. A lot of people believe that he's basically on that cusp of getting in. Do you believe Edgar will get in next year?
Absolutely. I mean, you're that close. I think it'd be a sympathy vote for him too, being just a 20 votes short. So yeah, I really do believe he'll be in the Hall of Fame. I didn't vote for him. I'm not sure I will next year. I have trouble with the fact, not so much a DH, but if you're a DH, hit some home runs, drive in some runs. You know, he's got, about 180 home runs less than Fred McGriff, 300 ribbies less, a couple hundred runs less. It's one thing to get on base, and he did that. But, the object of the game is to score the most runs. And, when you're not scoring runs or driving in runs, which he wasn't, I think it's a little short for a Hall of Fame. That being said, terrific guy, and I do believe he'll make it.
With that being said, do you believe then, since you said you didn't vote for Edgar, would you then vote for David Ortiz?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at the difference in the home run total between the two. I imagine also the ribbies would be different, maybe the runs too. So yeah, to me, David Ortiz. I know people argue and say that Edgar Martinez is the best DH in history. I think David Ortiz was, and what Ortiz did in the postseason was just unbelievable, and a huge leader in that clubhouse. Without David Ortiz, they're not winning. They're not winning at least two of those World Series.
Mussina got 63.5%. Curt Schilling got 51.2%. What are your thoughts on those guys eventually getting in? What do you think their prospects are?
Well, I think Mussina's a lock. I really do, and I think Schilling's close. I voted for Mussina this year. I have not voted for Schilling yet, just because he doesn't have that win total I like. What is it, around 212 wins? About 50 less than Mussina. But that being said, fabulous postseason pitcher. He had some rough years in there too, some terrible years, but came on strong. So I do believe one day I will vote for Schilling. I'm not sure when. I don't care about the political comments, but just the win total bothers me. I wish he had more wins.
That's interesting, because I always heard people say that if a guy's a certain number of wins over losses, that means a lot to them. And a guy like Schilling, he's about 70 more wins over losses. But for you, you're saying it's the total of wins that you're looking at. Why is that?
I just like to see more, wins mixed in there. It's like a 250, 260 win type thing. I would like to see. I just think wins, means everything, or not everything, but a lot. I remember talking to Greg Maddux at the Hall of Fame a couple of years ago when he got in, and someone said, "Greg, you think wins are overrated in today's game?" And he says, "You got to be kidding me. As a pitcher, that was the biggest thing. You want to become a 20-game winner. And so I think wins do mean a lot. And like I said, Kurt had some great years in there, but not a whole ton of them. And there were some awful years in there mixed in there as well. So like I said, I do believe I'll vote for him before his 10 years are up, but I have not yet.
Bob, my perspective on Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, for me, has always been they would have been Hall of Famers before they ever took the PEDs. You know, Bonds was already a 400 home run, 400 stolen base guy. Clemens had the 220 strikeout games with the Red Sox before everything that happened after that. And I feel like in some ways, I think some people overlook that because they're so hyper-focused on what went on with those guys after that first half of their career. So what is your perspective on Clemens and Bonds?
You know, mine is just that those guys were not only the best of their era, but, you know, two of the greatest of all time. I mean, you throw away Babe Ruth, you can argue that Barry Bonds was the greatest, you know, player ever. You know, right there, you know, with the Willie Mays or Ted Williams. It was a wild, wild west back then. Everybody did something. And not everybody, but, you know, at least half of baseball.
Sure.
And those guys were never, you know, nobody ever said, hey, don't do anything. These guys never failed a drug test, never suspended. Now, I won't vote for A-Rod or Manny Ramirez because they were both suspended and hurt their team with their suspensions. A-Rod a year. These guys helped their teams win all the time. So I voted for A-Rod and voted for Bonds and Clemens from day one, and I think it's a travesty that they're not in the Hall of Fame, particularly when there's a lot of guys, you know, in the Hall of Fame, you know, PED users. You know, nobody has any facts, but there were a whole lot of PED suspicions in last year's class involving, you know, Mike Piazza, Jeff Bagwell, and Pedro Rodriguez, than even close to the amount of suspicions with Bonds or Clemens.
Bob, I heard a theory about this, and I always wanted to get a guy like yours opinion because you've been covering baseball for a while, and I had heard a theory from somebody a while ago that part of the reason why people believe that Bonds decided to take something was because he looked at guys like McGwire and Sosa and said, those guys are half the players I am, and they're getting all this attention. They're taking these PEDs, and his perspective was, why can't I take something? I want the attention as well. Do you think that's a valid perspective on Bonds?
I do, and I covered Bonds a ton. It was, you know, the year he hit 73. You know, I saw probably three-quarters of the games. I do believe that. I believe it drove him absolutely nuts when he saw guys like McGwire and Sosa, you know, on Time magazine covers and all over CBS News and stuff as these guys are the greatest players in baseball. You know, when they couldn't carry Bonds' jockstrap. I do believe that. You know, it was almost like, hey, if you want to see what someone can do when they use some stuff, let me show you. In the year Bonds hit 73 home runs, he could have hit 95 if he got pitches to hit. I've never seen anything like it, and I never will again.
With Bonds and Clemens, if you had to tell other writers out there why they should vote for those guys who are maybe on the fence, you know, now that Clemens has gotten 57% and Bonds has gotten 56%, they've gone up almost every year sequentially. Bob, what would you tell the other writers for why they should vote for Clemens and Bonds like you have?
Just said these are two of the greatest guys in their era. It just happened to be the steroid era, and it's like, you know, hey, there's no speed limits, no cops around. Is anybody going to go 55 miles an hour? No. Nobody did anything to stop it. There weren't teammates complaining. Management loved it. These guys helped their teams win. These guys helped baseball. You know, never once did they, you know, wasn't like they were showing up to the games, you know, hungover like a lot of guys, or nobody's using cocaine and stuff. Tim Raines got in, and he hurt his team badly by using cocaine. And also just how many PED guys are already in there. Like we said, last year's class, you know, were they those guys clean? You know, we can keep going back. There's probably, you know, close to a dozen guys in the Hall of Fame who use PED. If you want to count amphetamines, you know, there are probably not going to be a handful of guys in the Hall of Fame that never did amphetamines. So, you know, a whole lot of PEDs out there. I just think it's unfair to penalize those guys because they were so good. And I do think if Bonds had not broken Hank Aaron's record, people would look at him differently and say, okay, it's okay to put him in. But I think people are still bothered that he broke Aaron's record.
He is Bob Nightengale, writes for USA Today. You can follow him on Twitter at @BNightingale. Bob, always appreciate the time, especially the day after the election. Hope you enjoy the rest of the offseason because spring training is just around the corner.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have some free agent sign by then.
Hopefully, right? Bob, always appreciate the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.